Picture this. It's the early hours of a crisp spring morning in Zurich. Guests at the ultra-exclusive Bauer al-Lach Hotel wake up to a pretty extraordinary sight. Police officers are arriving in droves. But they're not there for your typical criminals. No, they're there for some of the most powerful men in world football. Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into one of the highest-stakes corruption scandals in sports history, the dark history of FIFA and how football's global empire nearly collapsed.
Authorities executed a sudden, highly coordinated raid right there at the five-star hotel, sending absolute shockwaves across the globe. Breaking news broadcasts lit up everywhere, showing top executives being escorted out from behind police lines. And the crazy thing is, this wasn't just some random sting operation. This was the dramatic culmination of years of intense investigation into the absolute highest levels of the sport.
Which really begs the question, how in the world did football end up here? How did the organization governing the world's most popular sport, a sport so many of us grew up playing, watching, and loving, become completely engulfed in a federal scandal? Well, to understand the arrests, we first have to understand the sheer scale of the empire that FIFA built. To answer that, we're diving into Chapter 1, the rise of an empire, and the concentration of global power. See, right from its creation, FIFA oversaw a rapid, unprecedented global expansion of football. As the sport's popularity exploded, so did its flagship event, the World Cup. It transformed from a simple international tournament into the single most-watched sporting event on the planet. And with that immense power and expanding influence came immense opportunity. Right? And if we really want to understand that power, we have to look at FIFA's money machine. The commercial value of football absolutely skyrocketed, creating these fierce, high-stakes bidding wars among global brands and television networks who were just desperate to be associated with the World Cup. Broadcasting rights and massive sponsorship deals essentially became the lifeblood of the organization. This didn't just bring in revenue, it flooded them with cash, fundamentally rewiring the entire economics of the sport.
And when we say cash, we are literally talking about billions of dollars. Billions with a B. This sheer, staggering scale transformed FIFA into one of the wealthiest organizations in all of sports. But as an investigator, whenever you see a vault flush with billions of dollars, it begs one critical question. Who exactly was holding the keys? Who controlled all this money?
That brings us to Chapter 2, the warning signs. Because let's be real, a scandal of this magnitude doesn't just happen overnight in a vacuum. Long before the police ever showed up in Zurich, there were deep, systemic vulnerabilities.
Exactly. Long before the arrests, there was a glaring pattern of systemic vulnerability. You had a massive concentration of power sitting with a highly exclusive executive committee. Add a severe lack of internal transparency to that mix, and you've got a perfect recipe for trouble. In fact, investigative journalists had been ringing alarm bells about these completely opaque governance structures for over a decade. But for a long time, those warnings were largely just ignored.
And all of that comes to a head in Chapter 3, the bidding wars in the fight for the World Cup. If billions of dollars were flowing into FIFA, the ultimate prize, the ultimate source of massive leverage and power, was deciding which nations got to host the World Cup. This was where the stakes were the absolute highest.
Throughout the 90s and into the 2000s, the commercial stakes for hosting the tournament just grew exponentially, and naturally, so did the media scrutiny. But the absolute flashpoint? That was in 2010. The highly controversial, simultaneous votes awarding the 2018 and 2022 tournaments sent absolute shockwaves through the sports world. Fans and officials alike were left scratching their heads, asking, was football's biggest tournament actually being awarded fairly? By the post-2010 era, official investigations into the integrity of these bids finally began to gain serious traction.
But here is where we have to be really careful and separate the media noise from the cold, hard legal facts. For years, there were widespread rumors of bribery and backroom vote trading. You'd hear it everywhere. But what authorities eventually unsealed were official indictments detailing proven financial misconduct. We're not just talking about some minor ethical breaches in a sports club anymore. We're talking about documented federal crimes, which perfectly sets up the climax of this whole investigation. Chapter 4, Follow the Money. Because when you start using international financial systems for illicit gains, well, that's when the FBI arrives.
And the Department of Justice brought down the hammer with heavy federal charges, specifically wire fraud and racketeering. Now, you might be wondering, how did the U.S. even have jurisdiction over an international sports body based all the way in Switzerland? The answer is the banking system.
Prosecutors allege that executives were basically running parts of the organization like a criminal enterprise, and because they routed their illicit bribes through U.S. financial institutions, they triggered federal wire fraud laws.
So how exactly do you dismantle a global, entrenched network like that? It started with some truly unprecedented cooperation between Swiss authorities and the FBI. Together, they meticulously traced the illicit financial flows, piece by piece, bank by bank. That mountain of evidence is what finally culminated in those dramatic dawn arrests in Zurich, allowing them to unseal the federal indictments for the entire world to see.
The immediate aftermath was just absolute chaos. Chapter 5, The Fall of Football's Elite and the Resulting Leadership Collapse. The fallout was swift and completely unprecedented. We're talking about decades-long careers ending literally overnight. High-profile executive resignations followed one after another, and global media just watched in shock as the old guard of world football completely crumbled under the weight of these indictments.
To truly grasp the scale of what we're talking about, you just have to listen to the official stance from the U.S. Department of Justice. They stated, "The indictment alleges corruption that is rampant, systemic, and deep-rooted both abroad and here in the United States." So according to the authorities, this corruption wasn't just some weird anomaly, it was baked into the very system itself.
Which really forces us to ask the ultimate question for fans everywhere. Chapter 6, Has FIFA been fixed? Following the fallout, the organization immediately went into serious damage control mode. The old era was ostensibly over, and they announced a shiny new era of reform.
Right, they promised a comprehensive overhaul. This meant restructuring their leadership to dilute that massive concentration of power we talked about earlier. They rolled out enhanced transparency initiatives and implemented heavily revised open World Cup bidding processes so the public could finally see exactly how votes were being cast. But if you look at it today, experts are completely split on whether those reforms actually worked. On one hand, defenders point out that the new leadership has implemented genuine operational transparency and closed up the most egregious loopholes. However, critics argue that the core issue is still staring us right in the face, the billions of dollars still flowing through the sport. They argue that the massive systemic incentives and power concentration still exist today, just wrapped up in a slightly more modernized package.
The arrests made global headlines and, without a doubt, changed the landscape of football forever. But as we wrap up this explainer, one massive, lingering question remains over the beautiful game. Can an organization built on billions of dollars ever be completely free from corruption? It's a heavy debate, but it's one that impacts every single fan watching at home, and it's absolutely going to define the future of the sport. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll leave you to ponder that.